A skipper spent a seemingly normal day sailing along an Australian river, hoping to catch some fish to sell at the market. But instead of his usual catch of prawns and squid, he made a rather macabre discovery: a human body tied to a steel crucifix. To this day, this baffling case remains unresolved. Welcome to Old Casebook, where we revisit the forgotten mysteries of the past. Today, we open the file on one of Australia's most disturbing unsolved cases: the dark and haunting mystery of the Rack Man. An unknown man, brutally bound to a steel crucifix and left hidden beneath the waters for years. Who was he? Why was he killed? And why has this case remained unanswered for decades? Join me as we step back into this chilling investigation. On the 11th of August 1994, a skipper named Mark Peterson was sailing along the Hawkesbury River in Sydney, Australia, aboard his trawler, the Lady Marian. At approximately 11:40 a.m., while the boat was resting on the water near Flint and Steel Beach, Mark decided it was the perfect spot to begin fishing. That was until he felt a strong tug on his line. At first, he thought he had caught a giant squid or something similar, but this was far from the truth. Instead, Mark reeled in a heavy steel frame from the water, measuring approximately 182 centimeters in length, and pulled it onto the deck of the Lady Marian. The steel crucifix had two cylindrical metal bars welded to it, with another bar across the middle bent into an L shape. As Mark examined the frame more closely, he made a chilling discovery: a bone was sticking out of plastic bags that had been tied to the steel rack. At first, he assumed they were animal bones, but it was later confirmed that these remains were human. The deceased male had been attached to the handmade, rusty steel cross, his torso held in place by the L-shaped bar. John Doe's body was wrapped in plastic bags and bound to the crucifix using orange rope and various wires. A non-slip rope noose and wire were also found around the victim's neck. Mark Peterson, horrified by what he had uncovered, immediately contacted the Broken Bay Water Police, who arrived promptly to investigate. When the body was examined by a pathologist, it was discovered that the man was still fully clothed and still had some hair and soft tissue attached. The medical examiner determined that the unidentified male, nicknamed the Rack Man by Australian authorities, was Caucasian, possibly of Mediterranean or Central European descent, with Austria or Italy being likely origins. He was estimated to be between 21 and 46 years old, and stood at a relatively short height of around 5 feet 3 inches. The Rack Man was dressed in a medium-sized polo shirt with the words "Everything Australian" printed on it, a large pair of no-sweat branded jogging trousers, and medium-sized blue and white Sparrow underwear. Unfortunately, these clothing items were extremely common in Australia at the time, making it nearly impossible for investigators to trace where they had been purchased or who they originally belonged to. The male individual also had a pink lighter and a packet of Benson and Hedges cigarettes in his possession when he was discovered, both of which were found in his left trouser pocket. John Doe's teeth were straight, and he appeared to have had no fillings in the past, although he did have a lower right molar that had been removed, most likely in his youth. Other than this, authorities didn't have much to go on, due to the fact that the body had been underwater for such a prolonged period of time, estimated to be between 12 months and 3 years. The man's fingerprints could not be used to identify him, as they had completely washed away. DNA was also extracted from the victim. However, the profile they created was far too weak to make any sort of identification. At this stage, authorities had seemingly hit a dead end. They were able to determine how long the Rack Man had been on the riverbed through something called barnacle analysis. 2 barnacles were taken and sent to the lab, where they were placed into Petri dishes and their growth rate closely monitored. It was through this analysis that authorities estimated the man had been underwater for between 12 months and 3 years. A number of individuals, including a drug dealer, a businessman, and a rent-a-kill hitman, were considered by authorities as potentially being the identity of the so-called Rack Man. However, through DNA comparisons with family members of these individuals, They were all ruled out as being the unidentified man. For over 20 years, the rack man's body remained at the morgue, unidentified. After reaching several dead ends, authorities decided to release new facial reconstructions of John Doe in hopes that someone would recognize him. Unfortunately, their efforts were fruitless, and no significant leads emerged from these new reconstructions. The Rackman case had seemingly gone cold, and as the years progressed, no new leads were established. That was until 24 years later, on the 29th of August, 2018, when the New South Wales coroner revealed to the public that there had been a significant breakthrough in the case through advanced DNA technology. They were finally able to identify the man as 37-year-old Max Tanevsky. Max was from the western Sydney suburb of Newtown and had last been seen alive by his live-in girlfriend on the 11th of January 1993, leaving their home in Sydney and traveling toward the Gold Coast. Max was known to be a heavy gambler and often traveled to the Gold Coast to fuel his addiction, visiting several casinos during these trips. Before leaving on January 11th, Max had taken out approximately 18,000 Australian dollars, which wasn't unusual since he typically carried large sums of money during his gambling excursions. When Max didn't return home that day, his girlfriend wasn't immediately alarmed, as he often stayed away for a few days on these trips. It wasn't until a couple of days later that she reported him missing. Sadly, Max never came home again. He was known to have debts related to his gambling addiction, though the exact amount he owed and to how many people remains unknown. This makes the theory surrounding his disappearance seem rather plausible. One theory about why Max ended up being murdered suggests that he may have owed someone a large amount of money and couldn't pay it back, leading to his death. However, his family and friends were certain that Max had no links to the criminal underworld, though even if he did, it's very possible they wouldn't have known about it. The fact that Max was tied to a steel crucifix strongly hinted at gang-related violence rather than a random attack. The way he was bound to the crucifix appeared almost symbolic, possibly meant as a warning to ensure others wouldn't cross this gang or organization. But if that was truly the case, why did they feel the need to hide Max's remains underwater in the river? If the goal was to send a message, hiding the body wouldn't make sense. They would have made sure it was found publicly. Still, deaths involving water are notoriously difficult to solve because water washes away nearly all forensic evidence. The Hawkesbury River is a very active place, filled with trawlers, fishing boats, and daily activity. So perhaps the person or people responsible intended for Max to be found much earlier and identified, but that simply didn't happen. Another extremely unsettling detail of this case is that the metal crucifix was made to match Max's exact measurements. This would have required significant skill, likely from someone experienced in welding or metalwork, and assembling it would not have been easy. This disturbing detail may become even more important in future investigations into this perplexing case. Max Tun's full autopsy report has never been released to the public, so the exact details of his death remain a mystery. It's unclear whether Max suffered injuries before he died, whether he was tortured, poisoned, or if he died while on the crucifix or beforehand and was simply attached to it afterward to dispose of his body. Some sources claim that Max died from blunt force trauma. It is also speculated that because the rack was extremely heavy, more than one person must have been involved in both his death and the disposal of his body in the Hawkesbury River. Yet despite all of this, Max's killer or killers have never been caught. The Rackman case has puzzled Australian authorities for more than 30 years. And even though the victim has been positively identified as Max Tun, many questions about his death remain unanswered. The case has been handed over to the Unsolved Homicide Unit of the New South Wales Police Department in hopes of finally discovering what happened to the 37-year-old on the day he died. Detectives are carefully investigating Max's known associates, his criminal history, and are even trying to trace the origins of the metal rack in an effort to uncover the final pieces of this chilling puzzle and bring Max's killers to justice. And so the mystery of the Rack Man remains unsolved, a silent reminder of a life taken and a story never fully told. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to subscribe to Old Casebook tap the bell icon, and stay with us as we uncover more forgotten crimes from history.